fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Well, welcome back into the House of Mystery. This is Al Warren here, and I've got Mr. Joe Goldberg in the house with me today.
I'm in the house, and I'm with you, always, when I'm in the house.
That'd be a bad life, come on.
Yeah, I take that back.
Yeah.
I need to get out of the house more, I guess.
Yeah, you need a good life. You need a good life. This is not good over here, so.
Well, I do the best I can. Wish I could do as well as Coy, because he lives the life.
He does. We've got Mr. Coy Hall with us, and we're going to talk about his new book. It's from the Royce Pembrook Thrillers, and it's book 2, The Switchblade Svengali. So thank you for being here, Coy.
Well, thanks for having me.
Coy, so you're like, you're really into the old movie scene. That really influences your writing, obviously.
Oh, it does, yeah. And I think even with something like the name Svengali, I know it comes from the novel Trilby, but when I think of it, I tend to think of the John Barrymore movie, the 1931 movie. I'm
totally addicted to that, but I'm writing a series right now that takes place, starts in the 60s and ends in the 80s, so I've been writing a lot, so I jump into it, and that's all I do 24/7 is I got old shows on, movies running all the time, and I'm watching and picking up just the feeling, the overall atmosphere of how they act in the movie, what they say, what's important to them. How do you get your influences into your books?
You know, the Switchblade Svengali set in 1968, so I think TV is very appropriate there, but with a lot of the earlier stuff I've written, like the first book in the series was set in the 50s, radio shows were actually a very big, radio dramas were a big influence. You can get a great feel for dialogue, I think, from watching or listening to something like Dragnet, in the 1950s and the kind of snappy dialogue in these shows. And that's always been a big influence for me, but I'm also influenced by novels from the time, from 60s crime novels. The Name of the Game is Death is a big influence, on this book and the kind of the tone of this book. And so I take a little bit from TV, from movies, from radio shows, from novels, from short stories. I really love the collections like the Best of Manhunt short stories, which are from the 50s and 60s too.
Hey, Coy, since you use other media as your influence, TVs, radio, the visual media, when you're writing, do you assign characters? Do you see, Robert Mitchum or, this character looks like this person sounds like that? Do you assign a famous character to them as you're writing them?
Yeah, I do. I can see it in my head, and sometimes when I start out, I'll assign people. And one person I see in my head with Royce Pembrook is Anthony Perkins. I see him, and so I don't know. It's interesting because that's what starts for me, and that's what's in my head when I'm writing it. But I don't know if that comes across to people, because it's not like an overt version of Anthony Perkins, but in my mind, it's Anthony Perkins playing a character, so it's removed from him a bit, but I do do that, yeah.
So how did you come up with the idea for book 2? Like, you've got the same character, and now he's on to a new sort of scam. So let's talk about that. Give the listeners a premise of what they'll get in book 2.
Yeah, so A Seance for Wicked King Death was the first book, and in it, Royce Pembrook is a con man, and he is involved with doing séances and just ripping off people that way. And it's all fraudulent, but then when that book ends, that's a 1956 setting. The sequel takes place in 1968, so 12 years later, and Royce is still conducting séances. He's still in that business. That's in the book. But he's moved into a new type of con with hypnotic regression. This type of He's moved out west to Arizona, to Phoenix, Arizona, and he's kind of this quack involved with hypnotic regression, and that's the Svengali part, right? That's where that comes into play. But the premise of the book is that 12 years have passed since Royce his issues, I will say, with book 1, and he has established a really good life in Arizona. He has patrons who take care of him, and he's doing well, and his old life returns to him. What he left behind in book 1 returns to him and tries to bring him back down, and he's going to prevent that at all costs.
So I can see eventually in the books in the future he'll end up running for president.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm terrible. I'm in trouble there. So now, when you did this, was there a cult sort of, like, 'cause you're using this from a UFO cult, heroin addict and all that? Or is there something that inspired you? Is there another cult at the time that you sort of took?
I when I first started writing the book, that wasn't part of it. And I had just stumbled upon, there was this documentary, and it was called Children of the Stars, right? Children of the Stars. And it was about this UFO cult, and then that began in the 1950s, and it was called something like Unarius or something like that. And Ruth Norman had started this cult, and she believed that science fiction shows, like, this is in the 50s, so I think she was going with like Flash Gordon and things like that. But later on, as sci-fi became more on TV with things like Star Trek, she believed that these were actual gospels, that people like Gene Roddenberry were visionaries. And the obvious joke in the room right now is about Scientology. But she believed that these were true documents, and so she started to make her own films. And these are like really terrible amateur movies that this cult had made. But I was watching the documentary on that, and I was just fascinated by it. And so I thought it was very much of its time. UFO cults in the 1950s, UFO religions, and that carry these, deeper truths. And so I just thought it would be a funny angle to put in. This is probably the funniest book that I've written. It's not a comedy, but there are a lot of opportunities for Royce he has a dry sense of humor. And when he's interacting, he goes to this communal living in Snowflake, Arizona, where this UFO cult is headquartered, and he's doing regression therapy, right, with them, and essentially planting ideas of abduction in their head and kind of reaping the benefits of that. But that's where that came from.
Did you pick Arizona for a reason? Because that's where the crazies, cult people live for you, or is there?
No, it was actually just a throwaway line in I was kind of saddled with it because it was a throwaway line in the first book that he was thinking about going to Phoenix. And I put no real thought into that in the first book. And then when I got to the second book, I guess he went to Phoenix. So it did work out because a lot of stuff goes on. And Snowflake, the reason I picked Snowflake, Arizona, was because I don't remember the name of the person, but there was like a famous abduction case there later on. So I thought that was kind of tongue-in-cheek reference to that.
Yeah, we know all the cult crazes are in Canada, right now.
Oh, of course. Canadian crazy cults. Kanakistan. I wonder about this now. Your character, Royce, are you developing him as why he does this sort of thing? Like what led him down this path? And do you kind of get into that, or you sort of stay away from anything too serious like that?
No, this is my most, inward novel. I think a lot of it is with Royce internally and why he does things, how he is a very controlling person, wants to control his life. Royce is a person who was born into wealth. And so he's born in the 1930s into wealth, and his family their wealth had been destroyed during there was a scandal during the Depression, and his grandfather was the wealthy one, and they had lost their money, but he had been raised in this environment where he had an elite education. He had traveled the world as a child. He had done these things, and he is a person who feels like he deserves that style of living, and goes to criminal means to get back into it. He isn't willing to work for it. He feels he deserves it, and that was what initially led him in to the séances and things like that, just playing around with that, and it snowballed from there. But this novel does develop that idea of Royce as his psychology, why he does this, why he preys on people. I think Royce really, by the end of this book, if you develop an idea of who Royce was in the first book, that's going to change by the end of the second book.
Coy, does he feel bad for what he's doing?
No, I don't think Royce feels anything inside for anyone else. He thinks of himself only. And what the difficult thing with Royce is, and this is something I really try to do, is to make a human being like that, but make him likable, make him so charismatic that you know what he thinks and you know who he is, but he's funny and he's charming and he's likable. And that dichotomy is something I've played with both books. I'll tell you, an inspiration for that is the novel In a Lonely Place by Dorothy Hughes, which was a Humphrey Bogart movie too. And the novel's wonderful. It's because Dick Still, he is this very charismatic person on the outside, but he's sociopathic on the inside. He's extremely turbulent and violent on the inside, and he's very smooth and funny and charismatic on the outside, and nobody knows it. And she really played in that novel with that exterior persona, which only the characters can only see that, but the reader is privy to the internal part and the external part, and that's what I wanted to do with Royce. The reader gets to look inside, but also outside too.
So when you write it in first person like that, what's the biggest challenges to writing a character like that? How do you attack that? How do you get that to where it comes out?
Well, I think the most difficult thing for me is to make him not someone the reader despises. I mean, he does terrible things to people. He really hurts people. And he lies to people. He lies to people who love him, even if he's incapable of returning that. He hurts people, and yet he keeps them hanging on, right? To make somebody likable despite all that is the most difficult thing to do. I hope I carried that off with Royce, because that was my intention from the beginning, was to make this despicable person likable.
So you wanted the reader to root for the bad guy.
Yeah, I do. Well, I think in the first book, he's surrounded by people who are worse than him, so it kind of eases you into that. I think it's easy to look at him as the least bad in the first book. I think that's more difficult to do with the second book, because the people around him are not worse. He's clearly the bad one, and yet he's the protagonist. You know, he's the person that I want people to, despite how he comes across and despite what he's doing, to root for his success.
And how do you want the reader themselves do you want them to say, "Oh my God, I'm rooting for the bad guys, like House of Cards. I'm rooting for this likable, really, really horrible person. What does that say about me?" Type of sense?
No, I don't think.
Come on,
that.
give them the psychology of it.
I don't think so. I think it's very natural to be conned by charm. I think so. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. There's nothing morally wrong with it. But the intellectual kind of play between I know he's the bad guy, and yet I like him. You know, I want him to do well. I want him to get past this. I don't want him to get drawn back into this. It's a fun with fiction. It's a fun thing to play with, and I think it's something that, you know, in real life you are duped by charm and charisma. Those things have a lot of mileage to them, and they work.
Yeah. So your time setting now, it's 1968. That is like a character as compared to like another person in the book. How do you manage to do that?
Well, you know, 1968 is one of those watershed years where so many things happened all at once, and the novel takes place in January of 1968. So a lot of that stuff's going to happen. So I don't have those events, those well-known events occurring at that time, but I wanted to think of it as, you know, preceding that, going into that. That's, you know, an election year. 68 was an election year, and that's something that in the book, one of the characters is obsessed with keeping up with the news, with the Vietnam War, with the presidential election, with all of that. And Royce is not. Royce is absolutely not, but his significant other is in the novel. So that's something that becomes like a mouthpiece for what's going on. And I did want to be careful. There's not a lot of, I didn't try to do a lot of name dropping to say, wink, wink, it's 1968. I wanted to be subtle about it. But I do that through one of the characters.
Right. That's a good way of doing it. What, was there a subtext or was there a meaning you wanted people to take away from this story?
Well, I think that one of the main ideas that is important in the novel is that Royce is a homosexual man in this time, and he's living with another man. In the first novel, that's in 1956, and I wanted to talk about kind of the social conditions of being an openly gay man in the 1950s, and how that has developed a little bit by 1968, but he still gets treated badly for it, but not by everyone. It's not this. He does have some people accepting and who know what's going on. There's a scene in the novel when two cops come to their apartment and aghast that two men live together, and they essentially lie to them that they're friends, and so that's still a necessary thing in that time. But I think that's something that as a social issue I wanted to bring out in the book.
How did you research 68? You can say there's a lot of 68. The social issues in 68 were huge. What did you do to funnel out the things that you needed for your book?
Yeah, well, my day job, I'm a history professor, and one of the classes I teach is on 1945 to 1990, and so that's something that I had familiarized myself a lot with the era and the issues as background knowledge. But particularly for the book, I did read a book called 1968 by Mark Kurlansky. It was a nice kind of boiling down of all the things that were going on in 68. That was like my immediate read when I was going into writing it.
And at your time frame, unlike today's writers, there's no cell phones, there's no internet, there's those types of things. Did you enjoy, or did you play upon the fact that you're writing historical fiction basically before everybody, current existence with this new technology world?
Yeah, my role when I write fiction is no cell phones. I really don't like it. So the only thing I write, is pre-cell phone culture. 1968, of all the books I've written, is the most recent in time, actually. Like, most of my books take place back in the 1600s, so definitely no internet and things back then. But it was more. It's interesting that you say that, because I do start back. I write medieval fiction and early modern stuff. Getting up to this time, I play with technology as if it is a new thing in the 1960s, because for me, with writing, man, I can include TV in this one. That's interesting. How are you going to do that?
Color TV.
That's right, yeah.
Mummy's got an electric washing machine.
Yeah. Well, I've had Royce as a character. He loves movies. He's just a kind of cinephile, film fanatic, and he's amazed in the book. He's amazed that they show films on TV. In your own home, you can watch these, and so that was kind of technology and part of the era that he found interesting, because he was a child of the 30s, and he was kind of my idea. He was raised by the cinema. His mom would drop him off at the movies, and he would stay there all day.
Well, that was a big deal. Big debate about showing movies on film on television.
Yes.
Huge discussions about that.
Yeah.
No, it was.
Yeah. But I think that's what makes the error. I don't think you can do, I don't know, like the noir fiction and crime mystery and stuff outside of that time. I don't think you can do a modern one in the same way. You need to have those elements to create that atmosphere, because it's all part of it, for me, anyway.
I do think one thing that's missing that you can do in that era that you can't do now is just people today are really never bored. Right? There's always something to do, and so you don't really have these internal moments where you're just sitting there doing nothing. I always think of Philip Marlowe, working out his chess problems. That was always a big thing, which you just wouldn't see. That's why he'd be playing on his phone today and scrolling.
TikTok.
Yeah. And I like those moments that, characters can be bored, or they can be isolated, and they can be removed from one another and just kind of stuck with themselves.
But I think that it creates a different type of atmosphere, a different character when they have that time. You know what I mean? The way they dress better, they have more time to do things. Everything's more important than it is now. Now everything's flyby. It's different. So I don't think you can get the same. I think it's a good thing. I think
everything's instant now.
Yeah,
you can get the answer immediately. That's not good for a book.
It's not good for a detective, right? Like
for a detective, exactly.
You just go on Google.
There's no movie or TV show now that doesn't go. The cell phone is not the main character.
I always dislike that, and it's common in movies where the character just sits down and Googles something.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's so anticlimactic, where again, like Philip Marlowe has to go around and talk to everybody, and you get to meet the characters. It's much more interesting, and getting kind of piecemeal information rather than just Googling,
Because you don't need a detective. You can do it yourself.
Largely, yeah.
Yeah. It's Detective MD or Web Detective MD.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that time period's gone. If you don't write in that time period, it's not going to be the same. It's a different type of mystery now. I think we still have the same types of people. There's going to be the type of person you have in Royce existing today and doing things today, but they have to do it in a modern way. So kind of have to write around it in that way. So it's different.
I'll tell you too, with the thing with Royce and his moving places and moving so far away, as he moves around, he can become a different person in that era in a way that you wouldn't be able to today. He does, his part of his background is that he was in prison in the 1950s, but that would take a lot of tracking down to find that out. If you moved even to another state, you moved away from that, you would have difficulty learning that about him. And I think that's a way he can kind of hide himself and hide his intentions and become a new person, reinvent himself in each place that he goes. I think that's something that would be, next to impossible today.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It'd be much harder.
Absolutely.
I guess the other thing would be the characters, all of the people existing, their behaviors, their attitudes, how they dress, what they do, get up in the morning, and how do they make breakfast, what do they eat. Like all the little things are quite a bit different than they are today. So that's another thing you kind of have to pick up or learn to put into the book.
And I think those are nice, subtle things that you can do. Those are things that you can, again, not say wink, wink, it's 1968, just by the fact that you're listening to news on the radio, of an evening, or watching the late show, the movies at night, sitting on your couch and being amazed that there are films on TV, or just things as simple as getting groceries, but there's no supermarket, to get groceries from.
Spending an hour reading a newspaper.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But I think that's great. I think that's little things, and it's good. I think it's part of history. History makes it more intriguing. Your humor in it, I guess you have to be careful on how you place your humor in a mystery.
Yes, that's something that I don't want it to be. It's not a comedy, but I just want it to, every now and again, I think that's part of what makes Royce likable is even though he's ridiculing people and his humor's mean-spirited a lot of the time, it's easy to laugh along with him. He's just kind of got this, he's not sarcastic. He's not a sarcastic person, but he's got this kind of dry sense of humor, that especially, again, it comes out in numerous times in the novel, but with the UFO cult in particular, he's punching down at these people. Which again, if one part of your brain says that's not okay, you have to laugh at that. But another part of your brain says this is obviously ridiculous. The situation, because the guy who leads the UFO cult in the book is named St. Paul, and he is the type of person who will tell you that smoking cigarettes is bad, but he's doing heroin. Yeah. And so these things that are just so obviously ridiculous, and Royce pokes fun at that.
Hey, so where did Royce come from? Is that like a lot of people you've known or seen? His personality, is that a lot of you that goes into it?
Well, I don't know where Royce came from. I started out in 2020, and I had written a story, and it was an unnamed character. It was a short story, and it was supposed to be funny. I don't know if it was funny or not, but it was called Tibet Has a Book of the Dead Too. And it's just essentially him arguing at a carnival with somebody about the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And it's this unnamed character. I didn't say it was a great short story, okay? But that's where it begins. And
laugh a minute.
Yeah, and that was him, I think. And because I didn't know that at the time. And then when I started to write this novel, it was looking back, I think that was him. That's his genesis. He started in that short story. And once I figured that out, he came to life. But he's not based on anyone in particular, anyone in my life. I won't say that out loud, It's based on my sociopathic roommate,
Yeah. Let's get a phone number here.
The one that you killed off, and don't believe that about.
Yeah, the one that's in the ditch somewhere. Well, it's really cool. I think it's great. I'm glad you're doing these books. How many do you think you're going to do now? Is there kind of no outline to this? You're just kind of doing it as it comes, or
no?
What's your plan?
I think that I'm satisfied with the way this book ended. I don't plan on doing. I had plans of doing a third book, and I had it in mind of what I would do, but I really like the note that I ended the Switchblade Svengali on. I was very satisfied with the ending of it and what it implies, at the end of what's going to happen. And I could spell that out and write a third book. And if I did, it would be a 1970s book, so kind of keep it the 50s, 60s, 70s. But I don't think so. I think this is the last book. If I do any more Royce stories, they would be short stories from his time on the carnival circuit in the 1940s and the early 50s. I think there's some potential there to do some short stories, but I don't think I'm going to do any more.
Right. Yeah. You can only do so much sometimes with a character, and plus the timing runs out.
I think I told Royce's story, and I'm very satisfied with his character arc from the first to second book too, and I don't want to ruin that by overdoing it.
Social media, website, lemonade stands. Where do you like people to find you?
I've been trying out Blue Sky lately as a new site, and I'm liking that. So that's my main thing. Getting away from Twitter. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, all those places though, and I have a website, coyhall.com. And I also want to say one thing too. I'm playing around with trying to do some historical anthologies. So I'm started this micro press called Scythian Wolf, the Scythian Wolf, and so ScythianWolf.com too has this. But I did earlier this year, I did a World War I anthology of stories, and next year I'm doing a horror tales of the scientific revolution, so going back to 1500s and 1600s, doing an open call anthology for that. So that's something I'm branching out with. So that's another place you can find me, is ScythianWolf.com.
Okay, well, we'll put the book up as well as all of your sites, and we enjoyed having you here. So again, the Switchblade Svengali, and it's Coy Hall. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.